So this weekend I have been starting to learn my lines for Othello, well, for Desdemona, because I'm not playing Othello. I got the script back in April, so on the run-up to rehearsals I made sure I was as familiar with the lines as I could be by just rereading it and reading it and reading it and reading it and reading it again. But I didn't actually learn the lines. I prefer to wait until I've actually rehearsed a scene at least once before I sit down and try and learn the lines, just because once you understand how the scene works in the context of the world that you're trying to create based on the director's ideas, it then helps you to learn the lines, because you sort of understand why you're saying what you're saying. I'm a very visual person. I tend to remember how things look on a page. I don't have a photographic memory. I wish I did. I have a really good short-term memory. So I highlight all my lines. Some people don't, but I do. It helps me to kind of make out the pattern of the scene. I'll explain that. Especially when things are written in verse in Shakespeare. There's loads of clues in the way that the verse is written and the way that the scene is written for the actor to tell you how to play them. Modern dramatists would have included character directions and stage directions, you know, in little brackets before the line, as you know, indicating how you're supposed to say things. But Shakespeare doesn't do that. What he does is he leaves all these little clues in the way that the verse or the prose is written, more so the verse. So by highlighting it, I always find that helps to sort of bring out any patterns in the scene that give me the little clues on how to play them. For example, there is a scene, I'll show you in a minute, the scene with Desdemona and Othello. So she's just been talking to Cassio, who she's trying to convince that she'll speak to Othello on his behalf. And then Othello comes in and she makes her first attempt at talking him into letting Cassio back into the fold. And if you look at the way the scene is written, it sort of indicates how much of the scene is driven by Desdemona. And by sort of by highlighting my lines, I'm able just to kind of go, yeah, she's got massive chunks of speech, which suggests to me that she's having to work quite hard to convince first Cassio and then to convince, secondly, Othello. I'll show you. So this is the scene I was talking about. If you look at the orange bits, you can see that Desdemona has got quite big chunks of speech throughout the scene, which to me indicates, first of all, how much she's actually driving the scene, but also how much she's having to work. She's having to work quite hard to convince, first of all, Cassio and then Othello. Otherwise, you know, she'd have much shorter lines if it was easier for her. The fact that she's having to speak in quite big sections means she's having to work really hard. She's having to be really persuasive. And I find once I sort of think of a scene in that way, look at the pattern of the way that the person is speaking, I kind of understand how to play it, or certainly one of the ways that I need to be playing it. And then once I have that in my head, I actually find it really easy to learn the lines. They tend to just sort of fall into place once I know what the character's function in that scene is, why they've been written in that scene, what the playwright has been trying to achieve in that moment. I think once you kind of understand that, certainly once I understand that, the lines tend to go in really quite easily. I wanted to give you, just very quickly, another example of the patterns that can kind of get highlighted by highlighting. So this is the final scene between Desdemona and Othello, and if you sort of look at the orange bits, it's really short lines. Eventually it gets to be really short lines. There's a lot of shed lines in the verse, which indicates that the scene has got a real sort of pace to it. The fact that the characters are sharing a verse line means that their speech patterns are following on really, really quickly from each other. It's not like the one before that where she's got lots of time to think about what she's saying and she's driving the scene. In this scene, she doesn't have any time. Her life is in danger, essentially. So she's just speaking really instinctively. She's fearing for her life. And there's no time. It's not about being persuasive. It's about begging and pleading for her life. So the lines are really short and snappy and quick. and again that suggests how quickly it suggests the pace of the scene, and how quickly it all unfolds. And again, once I kind of know that, once I get my head around that part of the scene, the dynamic of it, the lines tend to sort of fall into place pretty quickly. I guess I'm coming from a point of view that once I understand how the character works within that scene, I can kind of imagine what they're likely to say, and therefore I kind of remember the lines really, really quick. So that essentially is how I make a start on learning my lines. I look at the patterns and the rhythm of a scene within the context of the play. I found it really frustrating last week, even though it was very early days of the rehearsal process. I found it really frustrating having the script in my hand, mainly because if Desdemona is one thing, she is pretty tactile, and I think that's what kind of gets her into trouble. So it was really hard. I kind of knew in my head how I imagined her being and what I wanted to try and achieve, but you've got this massive script in your hand, so I'm really looking forward to getting these lines down and exploring her physical sort of presence within the scenes over the next few days. And yeah, once the actors get the scripts out of their hand, I think that's when it gets really exciting, because you can really start to play around with the scene. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.